It happened right here. This is a shot from the Talent Mobile Estates in Talent, Oregon, my hometown. And I guess I need to back up just a little bit and say that the day before, September 8th, Labor Day 2020, was a really big day in the Rogue Valley. And if you were here on that day, even if you didn't lose your home, and even if you did, you are fire affected. So that morning, shortly after 11, the first calls came in about a brush fire along the Bear Creek Greenway. And by the end of the day, it had really devastated our community. First, I went into Ashland, got my folks out of their house, and then I went home and I packed up my stuff and got out. And then we all went to Medford, and that night, as I was watching the glow of my hometown burning, we got another evacuation notice for level 2, get ready. And we'd just gotten all the animals and family and everyone out. So I really consider that day just deeply, deeply painful and full of a lot of trauma. But I woke up the next morning and I realized I was really sick of running, right? I've been running all the day before, so I went back into town, into my hometown, and I'm carrying this paper because we got a lot to get through and very little time to do it, so if I have to check it, just realize I'm just trying to keep myself on task. But when I drove back into Talent, Oregon, I realized that everything had changed, right? We had lost 2,500 homes. We had lost 21 manufactured home parks, primarily full of seniors, folks who spoke Spanish primarily. We'd have, in the Phoenix Elementary School, 80% of the children had been displaced. It was just a huge, huge devastation. We'd really lost the economic coal, the workforce, the naturally occurring affordable housing in the valley, the things that, made this lunch, the people that cleaned it up afterwards, the folks that make the beds here, the folks that, act in Shakespeare, make Shakespeare ready. Our whole economy was impacted and our whole community was really heavily impacted. So when I went back into town, I did what I could, right? I grabbed my fire trail, I went and started putting out fires at the police station here, there, burning creosote logs, et cetera, and I found myself spraying this pile of burning asbestos. And I really had to then ask myself, well, is this my highest purpose in this space? And my background is not in firefighting. I'm not a firefighter. But the answer to that was no. And so from that, I formed a long-term recovery organization, a nonprofit with a mission to support community solutions for long-term recovery, preparedness, and resilience in the face of natural disasters. And it's called Firebrand. That's a really big mission. Thanks. That was the easy part, right? Starting an organization is easy, but doing the actual work is really hard. So that was the easy part. It's a big mission with trying to face an even bigger problem, and so we needed to start with some definitions. So, what is the definition of resilience? Go ahead on that one. So we adopted this one from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Resilience is the ability of a system and its component parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner, including through ensuring the preservation, restoration, or improvement of its essential basic structures and function. That was a 2 or 3 breath sentence, right? It's really complex when you get onto the ground. In our recovery, that involved lots of partners, lots of agencies. The fire does not respect boundaries, so it burned across 5 different jurisdictions with competing priorities. And since it was our first disaster, our first wildfire, we really only had, famous phrase, the concept of a plan, right? And so you have to overlay all of that against a really very rich and deep layer of community trauma, individual trauma and community trauma. Go to the next one there. This one is a real wake-up call. These are sort of the phases of disaster, right? You can see the pre-disaster, the impact, the heroic response, the honeymoon phase, the disillusionment, the reconstruction. Luckily, we're far along on the right here. But that roller coaster right there, I'm going to talk about a bit more, and how sort of the approach to community resilience really involves a lot of regenerative practice and whatnot. That roller coaster is really very ripe for a meritocracy and ideas that work, innovation. Everything is messed up, everything's fucked. So now we have to put it back together. How do we put it back together? But what I started realizing, because my background, as I said, was not in disaster, it was in producing large music festivals. It was in journalism. It was in a different types of lifetime that kind of led me to that moment. But it's a one-to-one skill set with disaster recovery, with refugee crises, with wildfire event production is, because you're dealing with displaced populations that have the same needs, the same human needs. But it was a really rich space for what can we do differently, how did we get here and what can we do differently moving forward. And one of the wonderful things about wildfire and disaster is that it's happened, and you have communities who share their lessons. They shared their lessons with me, with us, and now we're honored to share it with other communities like Maui, like Lahaina, like other places that are, even today burning. So one of the lessons that was passed on to us from Sonoma and from Paradise was the idea of a block or zone captain systems, and that really is just making sure that survivors are part of the decision-making space, that they're lifted up and empowered to be part of their own recovery and be the agents of change. So that had always been a volunteer program, and we were able to luckily improve that system by employing them, by finding public dollars to actually employ survivors in the recovery over time. And we did that. We created standard operating procedures. We created best practices. We identified obstacles in sort of like, in trauma care and how do you speak to people from a lot of different backgrounds and move them forward through the recovery. So again, we're able to share that with other communities today. But the other part we did was data collection that hadn't been done before. So we have really tracked every single interaction over the last 4 years, every email, phone call, conversation we've had with survivors, and how did that track over time, and then how can we build tools that show it, right? Because there's a lot of talk about it would be so good if. Well, let's actually show it over time. So data collection has been a really big part of, and analysis has been a really big part of our work. The program, the Zone Captains program, has done a lot of really cool stuff. It's informed legislation, policy. It's made resource programs a lot more accessible. It's helped out community really in overcoming immense obstacles at every level. But one story I like to tell is of our current program manager, Cass Cornwell. She was a fire survivor, lived with her sister. Their home burned down. They went to their folks' house. Their folks' home burned down. And they were able to all get in one house for a year. Now, Cass is neurodivergent, and she really didn't get out of bed for a year. And then she heard about that there was a group of survivors, and they were all kind of lifting each other up. And she came out to one of the meetings, and from that she kind of used what some would consider her disability as a superpower. She's basically a mentat. And every housing availability that happens across all these mobile home parks, all the different sort of data that we've been able to gather. She holds that data for a lot of different agencies now and shares it with them and tracks how our community is recovering. Today, she's the housing recovery co-director with the Jackson County Long-Term Recovery Group, and she's really a professional survivor and works on designing resource programs for recovery around the state. But this intersection of people and data is, in a disaster context, is kind of like trench warfare. The system's not really meant to deal with so many different inputs, especially when the inputs are from community itself. And I don't really have an understanding or a clear picture of how exactly AI could have helped us along the way, because this stuff is so very deeply relational, one-to-one, person-to-person. But that's kind of why I'm here, right? That's why I'm here to learn. And I do know what we did with our data. So if we, before we got into all this community organizing, what we really needed was a map. If you want to go on to the next one, that'd be great. So there's my kid, right? And we're trying to draw from memory what we lost in the fire. And driving through Talent Phoenix, it did not look at all like what it looked like before. So we're trying to remember what these manufactured home parks were called, what stores were here. It's all basically flat rubble if you've ever been through a wildfire. There's nothing there. So a lot of us got around a table and we drew it from memory, and we had my kid kind of color it in. And then really quickly, we connected with like Esri, right? If y'all ever do GIS work, we connected with Esri, and they taught us that we didn't have to use these paper things. We could really take this a lot deeper into data mapping and data storytelling. So every wildfire, every disaster, the first thing that happens is a damage assessment. So you have FEMA and agencies coming in and saying, well, here's what you lost, right? Here's how many tax lots, here's how many homes, here's the infrastructure that you lost. That's really useful, right, when you're trying to figure out how much it's going to cost to build back, but it's not so useful in a social context. So what we did was use that damage assessment as a baseline, and started telling our own stories about how our community is recovering. That was the question we're really interested in, is how is our community recovering over time? Is it equitable? Do people have access to housing? Are there populations, demographics that are coming back slower or faster than others, and why is that? So let's go to the next one. Oh wow, 5 minutes. All right, so two years later, we were able to come out with a really comprehensive dashboard that tracked all sorts of economic indicators, and we used public permit data to look at, basically what neighborhoods and types are coming back. Is there a gap? Can we move the community conversation into filling that gap? So that you can check all this out on our website, and you'll see a little QR code at the end to go check that out. But essentially what we learned was relationships and data are really power. It's almost Promethean to be able to speak in this language to government, to planners, et cetera, and try to figure out how a community can recover even more. I'm gonna just talk over this next one. Go ahead and play that one. So 4 years later, we have programming that really spans the different phases of disaster, right? So from response to recovery to readiness. And instead of a really complex definition of resilience, I believe we're able to now sort of solve for resilience by this last bit that'll come in here, is that, response and recovery and readiness, right? There's the phases, plus the relationships, a little bit long, equals resilience. You'll see this. There we go. There's the math equation. So we met with a lot of folks, this last phase of readiness. How do we prevent this kind of thing from happening? And we met with a lot of folks, academics, fire protection agencies, et cetera, to ask what is the gap? And the gap is who can hold community relationships over time and build those communities up. My understanding of regenerative practice is really to create systems that recognize the full resource potential within themselves, not extractive, but nourishing how we can make impacted populations the agents of their own change. It's not prescriptive, it's adaptive, right? So our vision statement is creating resilient communities to better confront a changing climate by placing affected populations at the center of transformative action. So like the Zone Captains and the Loss and Recovery Dashboard Project, now we're really working on how do we prevent it again? How do we prepare communities and create more fire-adapted communities? How can we leverage the relationships to create new community data? And we're working to do that through our latest program, which is called Ready Now. The Now stands for Neighborhoods Organized for Wildfire. And we're asking the questions, how can we expand the definition of local knowledge to improve how our community recovers? We've asked that question. As far as preparedness, a lot of folks are asking the question, how can we expand the definition of local knowledge to improve like incident response, initial attack during wildfires, and better protect the most valuable and vulnerable resources we have? Our schools, our people, our places, our animals, our infrastructure, our agriculture, all that kind of stuff. Others are working on how local knowledge can expand or improve landscape treatments. That's something Kevin's going to get in here really soon. But how can we really come, to meet this this era of megafires with better data, better community-generated data, and involve those stories and those experiences in tackling the problem of wildfire? So the Ready Now program really works on building community, right? Fire-wise communities, we do free home assessments. We can provide resources, cost share programs to harden homes. Our job is not really to prevent the forest from burning, but to mitigate community loss from wildfire. So I really liked Gaia's question yesterday. We incentivize climate collapse, but how can we incentivize climate adaptation? So that's really at the heart of what we're trying to work on here. AI is going to be part of our work. We're not there yet. I'm still a novice. We have a tool that uses a lot of machine learning in recognizing risk in communities and then creating programs that kind of mitigate those. One way to think about this, and sort of the way to lead into Kevin's, is to look at how nationally we think about wildfire. So you have the fire-adapted communities. All those things I circled are things that we do, but it's a really complex, rich environment to think about how you change, how you adapt communities to wildfire. The other, we have to kind of zoom out a little bit further and look at sort of the national approach to wildfire. The next one is sort of the national cohesive strategy. So we work in this upper circle, fire-adapted communities. Others, your fire districts, your forestry departments, they all work in that other one, safe, effective, risk-based wildfire response, essentially suppression. And then the third one, which Kevin's again into, is the resilient landscape side. But like any sort of like tripod or a three-legged stool, you can't put too much weight on one without the others collapsing. One of the reasons why we're in this area of megafires is because we've put so much time and money and energy into that one suppression place, right? We've lost indigenous fire. We've lost our relationship to fire on the landscape. We have been in an extractive process for timber for hundreds of years. We've had a cooler climate for, unseasonably in the Pacific Northwest for 100 years. We have massive fuels in our forests. So they're starting to invest more in resilient landscapes. How do we heal our forests? And then our work is really how can we work with communities, adapt them, and make sure that the data that we're gathering can be helpful in getting that across to more fire-adapted communities. So really, that gives me the opportunity to turn over to Kevin, who's really working on the resilient landscape side, and he's going to talk a lot bit more about AI, I imagine, and I've been talking a little bit more about sort of regeneration and sort of the fire-adapted community side. So thanks. There's my contact info. I'll be here for a bit. Yeah, man.
Thank you. I'm working on a slightly different angle on this, which has been on the sort of preventative side of things, and couldn't agree with Tucker more around how much money's been thrown at the suppression side, which has really damaged our landscapes in sort of unimaginable ways. I come from the product innovation side of things, and for about 20 years, I've been helping companies like Microsoft and TED conferences and all kinds of folks to create sort of their new generations of products and services. But it was interesting yesterday when Jay said, what was the big moment for you, when sort of took a big left turn, and my big left turn came around wildfire. And it came out of nowhere for me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about that story. Around 2017, the Park Fire and the Tubbs Fire happened in Northern California. They're massive. I'm sure you know a lot about them, and I'm gonna reference those fires a little bit as a part of this talk. And so this is really about wildfire, and it's about data and AI. It's about ecosystem resilience and systems thinking and tools and models and how to use these things together to hopefully create a better world for all of us. These fires in 2017 were massive, but in 2020 there was, just as a data point, this is what happened. There was about $63 billion in public health impacts as a result of the smoke and inhalation, as well as the actual destruction. There are estimated 3 to 4 trillion in ecosystem benefit losses. There's 2.3 billion in fire suppression costs, 20 years of lost profitability in the insurance industry. I'm gonna, for a second, pause myself. I'm gonna come at you guys really fast right now, and I'm gonna take a sort of rule or a playbook out of Micah's playbook here and ask for a little call and response, which is I talk really fast when I get excited about this stuff, and so the call and response is slow down, Kevin. Slow down, Kevin. Excellent, thank you. I need the reassurance there. All right. All good, thank you. Yeah, I'm going for it. I was approached by a woman named Allison Wolf in 2018, and she said, we have got to figure out a way to better use data and information and communications in order to get people to understand what's happening on these landscapes and how to potentially fix the problem. And tech can't fix everything, but it sure can help in a lot of situations. And so instead of believing that we could just go work that out on ourselves, we went and interviewed about 100 people. And it was quite a process and extraordinarily eye-opening for me professionally. And so this was land management, emergency services, forest ecology, fuels, meteorology, hydrology, wildlife biology, a huge swath of people, state level, federal level, local levels, and very specifically as well through the Tahoe region, which is very progressive around these things. We learned a ton. So what did we hear? We heard that planning, predictive tools, monitoring are the most important things, that they feel like they're shooting in the dark. Lots of these plans take decades, which is inconceivable to me, and it's paper being walked around in some of these organizations, let alone multi-agency stakeholder situations where they're trying to share information. One of the major vectors in all of this is around public visualization, because most of these things need to go to public comment, and getting people to understand it at a local level, getting people to understand what's happening to their landscapes, and what is possible is something that's strictly sort of not happening. They do it in small forums, and it's not going well. One of the challenges is for them is like, how do we get this data moved around? How do we start to produce things, artifacts, shared sets of information in order to expedite these processes? And that these sort of treatments, if you will, to help with resilient landscapes is really about trade-offs at the end of the day. And I'm going to get in quite a bit more on that in a second here. So what's really needed in this situation is decision support tools that really fully explain the trade-offs that you're making, whether it's a local level or state level, all of the scales in between. The increased comprehension for everyone, so back to this sort of community level, helping people to understand what's at stake, allowing people to see the data, allowing them to see the analytics, bringing people along for that journey. And there's people all up and down the food chain in terms of their capabilities, their ability to process the information. So how do you begin to do some of those things? Some of the project planning, monitoring tools, like I was just saying, these folks, some people are very far removed from technology. They've never really used it. How do you accommodate for those things? And you can sort of feel the complexity building. The more information that we gathered, the more complex it all started to get. How do you begin to build dashboards that can sort of explain to people quickly what ecological health really looks like, and how we're doing? Which brings me around to ecosystem resilience. One of the people that I encountered in this journey was a woman named Pat Manley, who works for the U.S. Forest Service. And over the course of a pretty long period of time, she and a number of other scientists came together to build something called the Framework of Resilience. And what came to me was this incredibly long spreadsheet of all of these different vectors, all of these different ways of looking at what resilience really looks like across a landscape. And then it's everything from economic diversity, wetland integrity, biodiversity, you can read. But the upshot of all of these things is for each one of these sort of views of what resiliency looks like, there's just an incredible mountain of data. And so they rolled this up into one picture, and we created a visualization for them, which they're still using, which was just sort of a side benefit to this project, just to be able to sort of further their thinking and make it a little bit more visual and easier to understand. There's a lot of depth there that I'm going to skip for time's sake. So how do you design systems around this? The original concept around this was something that we were calling elemental. And it was conceived as one piece. It was conceived as one platform that allowed these visualizations to take place at all of these various scales. I could talk for a day about what this really was, but I can't. Scale, this is an incredibly important piece of this, and I didn't have my head around this when we first got started on this. But the data changes dramatically when you look at it from a stand or a house level, all the way through like a town, through a forest or a county, through a watershed, regional, statewide, national, global, you get the idea. But the kinds of people that are involved and the effects from one thing to the next sort of ladder up. And so the complexity just goes through the roof. It goes exponential effectively when you're trying to solve problems around this. The other piece of this is there's a lot of participants that are necessary in order to really fulfill on a promise here. And so whether that's the scientists themselves or people who are on the ground actually doing land burns, doing all of the planning, people in industry, as we know the insurance situation is out of control, how do you involve them so that they understand and can communicate, the policymakers and the general public who really need to be more involved in all of this. And so here's a little bit of a boring part. The idea was that you build individual pieces of this that are relevant to those audiences in order to create the value to get them in there. And so it's the same sets of tools and visualizations, data layers, they're just shown in different ways. And so how that manifests itself are things like there are people who are very deep down the rabbit hole on NEPA and CEQA planning. You can show the things that are directly relevant to them by using the same set of data but showing it differently. down at the local level of where I live. So what are the things that are relevant at a community level? How do you show the data layers and visualizations that are going to be meaningful to them? How do you include other information to make sure the value is high enough that they'll engage with it in order to guarantee their participation? Things like WUI risk assessment, and then finally land tender, which is the piece that actually out of this has been built so far. So one package out of what we had conceived there actually has been manifest. And so land tender is a lot about collaboration and workflow. And very quickly, kind of harkening back to what I was saying at the beginning of this, making sure that you can make this, the planning and monitoring and the collaboration easy to all people at all levels. We created some dashboards that allowed you to see your projects, what are the news and events that are relevant to me, communication with those other folks, information that's relevant to sort of my view of the world, down to the project level, right? So where are we on a North Yuba project is the example here. Where are we in this time frame? What are the next steps? What are the updates? What are the relevant documents? What's happening on that landscape from a data perspective? What's the relevant media? Who are the team members? Being able to do that sort of at a glance, making it user-friendly, is really the intent there. So how do we show what resilience looks like to all of these folks? Again, back to the information dashboards and increasing comprehension. So we took this this piece that we had designed just to be nice, and actually started to use it. I guess the side benefit of being nice occasionally. And so we started to port it into the actual interface itself for this platform. And so what you're seeing there on the right side is sort of our interpretation and feeding the data into something that's sort of at a glance. What's the health overall of this stand, of this watershed, of this state, what have you, at all of these different scales across all of these different pillars of resilience. And so you can continue to drill down on any one of these things depending on who you are and what you're trying to achieve. And so the views within the interface allow you to highlight different areas and get a sense of what's happening in a landscape. So trade-offs, obviously a huge ordeal across this, as everyone's got different interests along those lines. So how do you begin to represent that from a platform perspective? And so in this view of things, what you're seeing is the pillars of resilience on the lower part of this screen, and you're able then to drag, in this situation, what's the forest structure? And so these sliders allow you to play with different models of how that will affect the landscape. And what you're seeing in the upper portion is it's a 5-year time scale. So what happens in forest resilience or carbon sequestration or fire dynamics or water yield based on what you're doing with these areas. The other thing, it came up regularly over other talks, and I was vibrating. Raya talked about this a lot, is like placing a monetary value on things for better and for worse. It's the thing that gets people to respond. And so doing things like ecosystem valuations and showing people very visually and statistically, driven by data, what the difference is if you take action on a landscape or if you don't take action on a landscape in order to get people to act. The role of AI was massive in this. ChatGPT didn't exist when we started to do this, but we had designed AI into this from the get-go, which is how do you use this data? And I think Ian, yesterday morning, said something about how you get them to do all of the AI to do all of the sort of the planning part of things. Like they're better at data than we are. And so how do you use that data to start to drag different trade-offs, right? And so what you're seeing in the center part of the screen is the ability to sort of drag biodiversity a little higher than forest resilience and let the AI figure out how the treatment plan might be affected based on the priorities that you have on certain landscapes. Fire modeling's obviously a huge ordeal here and was the original driver for where we started with this. And so in this situation, we're using AI to fire model over landscapes over time. And so you can use the slider as a projection over various periods of time to see what happens either in a situation where you're not taking action or you are taking action. And how does the fire modeling show what will happen on that landscape over time. I contacted Alison Wolfs, the CEO of Land Tender, to find out how they actually are using AI, not just a concept piece. And they're using it to map vegetation at the fine scale, which is awesome. They bought a company that's specifically around fuels management and fuels modeling. They're using AI extensively to model out fuelscapes. They're using it as well to do 3D vegetation model, which is cool as hell. It's the combination of LiDAR satellite imagery to really be able to move in any direction to see vegetation and the progression of what vegetation is likely to do over time. And so, thank you. I actually only have 2 more slides, so it's all right now. I'm at the end. And so they're up next is for them to look at what the treatment effectiveness is actually going to look like, right? And so AI can begin to monitor over time. You're getting snapshots, and then you can begin to model out how effective the treatments really are, not just the models of them. And just I have 2 more slides. Land tender in numbers. So this is what happened after the concept. They went and secured $17 million in funding, private-public partnership. Really proud of that. Thank you. And the first installation happened in Tahoe Basin. 1.5 million acres was being managed by them initially. They subsequently, as a result of that, got a Series A, bringing the total funding to $34 million. And now land tenders being used to manage 7 million acres, larger than the state of Vermont. Just sort of like my parting thoughts with this to everyone. Please help everyone see what's at stake. This situation is obviously very dire. And the more people we can involve and the more people we can inform, the better off we're going to be. Bringing people sort of at a community level, Tucker spoke about this in a great way, so that they have a shared sense of their values and what's important to them is huge in this. Getting people, this is perfect. How do you leverage AI to do the task, to do the data compiling, to make this smarter and better, given how critical this is to move in an expedient way. And then let's inspire and equip change makers to act on this stuff and foster regenerative principles within them. Thanks.